Simone Garrett was 36 years old when she landed at Memphis International after 14 days in Nairobi and drove straight from the airport to the house on Lamar Avenue without stopping. Because something she could not name had been pulling at her since the third day abroad, a low persistent frequency. The kind she had learned in the army to treat as intelligence. She kept a go bag in the trunk of her car. She wore her hair close-cropped and her shoes flat, and she owned nothing she was not prepared to carry. Her husband's colleagues at the private equity firm called her Brandon's quiet wife, the one who did supply chain consulting, the one who never seemed to be at the parties long enough to leave an impression. What they knew of her fit on a business card. What they did not know would not have fit in the building where they worked. She pulled into the driveway at 6:47 a.m. and the house looked ordinary. That was the first wrong thing. She had called ahead 3 times from the gate, from the parking deck, from the highway, and Brandon had not answered once, which was not in itself unusual. What was unusual was the car parked at the side of the house, not Brandon's car, not a car she recognized, and the fact that the motion sensor light above the garage, which she had installed herself the week after they moved in, had been unscrewed. Just enough to stop it working. The kind of detail a person removed when they did not want the record of who came and went in the dark. She did not go to the front door. She went to the basement window. Her father was inside. Vincent Garrett was 68 years old, a retired Postal Service logistics supervisor who had spent 30 years managing the movement of things from one place to another without a single shipment lost on his watch, and he was sitting on the concrete floor of her basement with a blanket over his shoulders and a water bottle beside him, and a padlock on the interior door that led back upstairs. He was alive. He was alert. He looked at her through the window glass with an expression she had seen exactly once before in her life, the expression of a man who is relieved and furious in equal measure and is choosing, for the moment, to lead with the relief. What Brandon Garrett had not accounted for, not in any of the 9 months he had been planning what he was planning, was that the woman he had locked her father away from was the same woman who had spent 8 years in Army logistics, coordinating supply operations across 4 countries, who held the security clearance he had never thought to ask about, and who had, in her work bag in the back seat of the car, documentation that would reclassify the next chapter of his life entirely. What happened next was not a fight. It was a reckoning. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house on Lamar Avenue was a craftsman bungalow with a deep porch and original millwork that Simone had spent 3 years restoring during evenings and weekends, 1 room at a time. With the same patient attention she had once given to routing supply lines across difficult terrain. She had repaired the plaster walls herself, mixed to match the original finish. She had refinished the floors in the dining room, hard pine, nearly a century old, by hand with an orbital sander she borrowed from her father, who had shown up 2 Saturdays in a row to watch and offer commentary on her technique. She had rebuilt the front porch balustrade from salvaged lumber, every post measured and set level. The house was not finished. She had not expected it to be finished for another 5 years. That was the point. Good work took the time it required, and not a minute less. Her father had told her when she was 8 years old and had gotten frustrated with a school project that wasn't coming together the way she wanted it to, that patience was not the same as waiting. He had been very clear about that distinction. Waiting was passive, patience was active, patience was continuing to work while you waited for the conditions to align. He had said, "You keep your hands moving, Simone. You keep your eyes open. The moment will come. Don't be somewhere else when it does." She had written it on an index card and taped it to the wall above her desk. She still had that card. She met Brandon at a Chamber of Commerce networking event 6 years ago. He was smooth in the way of men who had practiced being smooth, confident in the way of men who had never been tested in a way that surprised them. He had good shoes and a deliberate handshake, and he had asked about her work with a specificity that seemed, at the time, like genuine curiosity. She had been careful with him in the beginning. She was careful with most things. But he had been consistent and attentive and had not triggered any of the particular interior signals she had learned in 8 years of military service to trust above all other forms of information. She had taken him home to meet Vincent after 4 months. Vincent had been polite. He had made coffee and asked Brandon about his family and his work and had said nothing critical. He had pulled Simone aside while Brandon was in the bathroom and had said quietly he's very interested in the impression he makes. She had filed that away. They married 2 years later in the backyard of Vincent's house under the oak tree he had planted the year she was born. And for the first 18 months, the life they built together felt solid. She traveled for work. Supply chain consulting took her to clients across the country and occasionally abroad. And Brandon managed the equity firm's mid-market portfolio, and they shared a comfortable checking account and the house on Lamar, and a routine that was, if not extraordinary, reliable. The first wrong note was a keyed lock on the study door she had never seen before, installed while she was in Atlanta for a client review. Installed quietly, not mentioned, the kind of small alteration that was easy to explain and easy to forget, and that Simone did not forget. She ran her finger along the doorframe when she found it, feeling the clean bevel of the new plate, the brass still bright without the slight tarnish of age. Recent work, done by someone who knew what they were doing, which meant it had been commissioned and not improvised. She had said nothing. She had asked no questions. She had continued cooking dinner and asking about his week, and refilling his water glass and watching, because the thing she had learned in 8 years of logistics was that you did not move on incomplete intelligence. You gathered. You cross-referenced. You waited for the picture to sharpen. She had not mentioned it to Brandon. She had noted it, and she had continued watching, because patience was not the same as waiting. She came home at 9:23 on a Tuesday night in March, 2 weeks before the Nairobi trip, to a sound from the study that she stood in the hallway and listened to for 60 seconds before she understood what she was hearing. A conversation, low-pitched, the specific register of voices that did not expect to be heard. One of them was Brandon's. The other was a woman's. And the quality of it, easy, domestic, the comfort of the genuinely familiar, told Simone something she needed no more than that 60 seconds to understand. She moved away from the door without a sound. Her face remained perfectly calm. She went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood at the counter and looked out the window at the side yard and thought with the practiced stillness of someone who had learned to operate in conditions that did not allow for emotional response. She thought, this has been going on for some time. She thought, the lock is not about privacy. She thought, find the edges before you touch the center. She did not touch the door. She went upstairs, set her work bag down, and made a call. Not to Brandon, not to anyone in her immediate life. She called a woman named Iris, who had been her logistics officer in the army and who was now a private investigator working out of Memphis with a background that had made her, over the years, exceptionally good at finding what people worked hard to keep hidden. She gave Iris a name. She gave Iris a starting date. She said, I need to know the shape of it before I know how to respond. Then she packed for Nairobi. She spent the first 3 days of the trip doing the work she had been hired to do. a supply chain efficiency review for a Nairobi-based textile firm, structured and meticulous, and carried out with her full professional attention, because she was not the kind of person who allowed one crisis to contaminate another. On the fourth day, Iris sent her a file. On the fifth day, she read it 3 times. On the sixth day, she called her attorney. The file was thorough. Brandon had been seeing a woman named Lynette Carr for 11 months, not a casual arrangement but a parallel life, carefully maintained, a downtown Memphis apartment in Lynette's name that Brandon co-funded through a series of transfers from a secondary business account he had established without Simone's knowledge. Lynette was a financial consultant at a firm whose primary client was Brandon's equity fund, which made the arrangement as professionally reckless as it was personally dishonest. There were also, buried in the financial transfer history Iris had assembled, 8 wire transfers over the preceding 9 months to an LLC that appeared to have no operating function except as a vehicle for moving money. The total, $63,000. That was not the worst of it. Iris had also flagged a power of attorney document filed 6 weeks earlier in Simone's name, with a signature that was close, but not exact, executed before a notary whose address corresponded to a mail forwarding service and who did not appear in the state registry of commissioned notaries. The document granted Brandon authority to make financial and property decisions on Simone's behalf in the event of her absence. He had forged it. She sat with that for a long time, in a hotel room in Nairobi with the city sounds coming through the window and the file open on her laptop, and she felt something she recognized from deployments, the moment when the intelligence picture assembled itself into something complete and unambiguous and required a response. She called her attorney. Vivian Cross had practiced in Memphis for 23 years and specialized in family law, estate fraud, and what she called, with considerable understatement, complicated situations. She was the attorney of record for Vincent Garrett's estate documents, which meant she already knew Simone's family well. She listened to the summary without interrupting. When Simone finished, there was a brief silence, and then Vivienne said, "The forged POA alone is a felony. Combined with the financial transfers, the LLC, and anything physical, anything involving your father or your property, we are in a different category entirely." "I land on Friday," Simone said. "Don't go home first," Vivienne said. Simone went home first. She went home because her father was not answering his phone and had not been answering it for 3 days, and that frequency she had felt since the 3rd day abroad had by now resolved itself into something clear and specific. She found the motion sensor light unscrewed above the garage. She found her father on the basement floor. She did not break the window. She went to the back of the house and used the key she kept under the 3rd porch step, inside a false bottom clay pot she had built herself, and which Brandon had never been curious enough to examine. She came through the laundry room entrance and moved through the basement in 15 seconds and had the padlock off the interior door in under a minute with a pick set she carried in the bottom of her go bag as a matter of habit, and which had, over the years, opened more than one door she was supposed to be behind. Vincent looked at her when she came through the door. He looked at her the way he had when she came home from her first deployment, not with relief that she was present, but with the particular satisfaction of a man who had known she was coming and had been right about that. She crouched beside him. "How long?" she said. "Since Tuesday night," he said. "He told me I could leave after I signed some papers. I told him I was comfortable right where I was." She almost smiled. "Water?" she said. "I'd prefer coffee," he said. She helped him upstairs. She sat him at the kitchen table. She made coffee. She called Vivienne. She called the non-emergency police line and gave a careful, factual account of what she had found and what condition her father was in and who was responsible. She used no adjectives. She used only events and timestamps. She had learned, over 8 years of military service, that the factual record was always more powerful than the emotional one, because the factual record was the thing that lasted. Brandon was not in the house. His car was gone. The study was locked and she did not open it yet because she was not finished documenting, and she had learned never to enter a space before she had recorded its exterior condition. She photographed the unscrewed motion sensor light above the garage. She photographed the exterior basement window. She photographed the padlock she had removed and the interior door it had secured, and the marks on the doorframe where the hasp had been installed, cleanly, recently, with good hardware. Whoever had done it had not been in a hurry. It had been planned. She documented all of it with the same methodical order she used on a supply chain audit: start at the perimeter, work inward, record everything in sequence, because the sequence was itself part of the record. Her father drank his coffee and watched her move through the kitchen and said, "After a while, he thought you'd be gone 2 more days." "I know," she said. "He underestimated your instincts. He underestimated a lot of things," she said. Vincent set his mug down. "Your grandfather used to say that the men who thought they were clever enough to fool the people watching them were always the same men who forgot that the people watching them were watching for exactly that." She wrote that down later. The reckoning did not happen at home. It happened 6 days later in a conference room at the Shelby County District Attorney's Civil Division office, in a meeting that had been arranged by Vivienne with the participation of a forensic accountant named Dunmore, who had spent 20 years untangling fraudulent estate instruments, and who had, within 96 hours of receiving Iris's financial file, produced a 41-page analysis of the LLC transfers, the forged power of attorney, and a third document, a property deed amendment, also apparently executed under the forged POA, that had attempted to add Brandon as co-owner of the house on Lamar Avenue while Simone was out of the country. He had tried to take the house. Brandon arrived to the meeting with his attorney, a man named Farrow, who had a good reputation and who would leave this meeting with a diminished one, having been given an incomplete account of his client's actions. He also arrived with Lynette Carr, who had apparently been told this was a routine marital mediation, and who sat at the table with the expression of someone who has just been asked to board a flight that is going somewhere different than the ticket said. Vivienne opened the folder. She did not rush. She laid each document on the table in the order they told the story, the forged power of attorney first, with the certified document examiner's analysis beside it, the authenticated samples of Simone's actual signature set in parallel columns so the differences were visible to anyone with working eyes. Then the 41-page financial analysis, tabbed at the relevant pages, the LLC transfer history highlighted in a color that did not require explanation. Then the deed amendment. Then, last, the police report from the night of Simone's return, 6 pages of factual, unadorned narrative that included Vincent Garrett's signed statement about the nature of his confinement, the duration of it, and the papers he had been presented with and declined to sign. Those papers, Dunmore had determined, would have transferred a portion of Vincent's own estate interest, a modest but real sum, held in a trust that Leonard Garrett's attorney had structured in 1998, into the same LLC that had been absorbing the marital fund transfers for 9 months. He had gone after her father's money too. Farrow, Brandon's attorney, was reading with the focused stillness of a man recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the case he had agreed to take. Brandon was not reading. He was looking at the table with the expression of someone counting the available exits and finding none. Lynette Carr looked at Brandon with the expression of a woman who had just been handed a financial disclosure she had not known existed and was rapidly revising a number of prior assumptions about the man beside her, about the situation she had walked into, and about the specific definition of the word partner. Simone sat across the table with her hands folded and her posture straight and said nothing for a long time. She let the document speak. She had always believed in letting the document speak. When the room had been quiet long enough, she said, "You needed me out of the country and my father out of this house because you couldn't complete what you were building with either of us present." She paused. "I've done 8 years of logistics. I know what it looks like when someone maps a supply chain around an obstacle. The obstacle was us. I just want you to understand that I see the shape of it." Completely, Brandon said her name. She stood, gathered her portfolio, nodded to Vivienne, and walked out. The DA's office opened a criminal investigation into the forged documents the following week. Vivienne filed the civil counterclaims within 48 hours of the meeting, recovery of the $63,000 in diverted marital funds, full costs and fees, and a petition for the deed amendment to be voided and expunged. Simone drove home and made dinner for her father, who had been staying in the guest room on the second floor since Tuesday and who showed no particular interest in leaving soon, and they ate together at the kitchen table with the evening light coming in through the windows she had reglazed herself and the floor beneath them original hard pine, every scratch of it earned. 10 months passed, and the world resettled itself into a new configuration that Simone found, on most mornings, to be better than the old one. She finished the porch balustrade in the spring, the final section, the northwest corner, the one she had been saving because it required the most precise fitting and she had not wanted to rush it. She set the last post on a Saturday afternoon in April, with her father sitting 3 steps below her, holding the level and calling out the readings, and when she drove the final nail he said nothing, only nodded once. And that was sufficient. She had taken on 2 new consulting contracts, both federal, both requiring the clearance that Brandon had never asked about, and that was now, in the aftermath of everything, simply a fact of her professional life that she no longer thought to minimize. The work was good. It was the kind of work that matched the tempo of her mind, and she had been away from that match for too long, softening her own edges to fit a space that had never deserved them. She had met someone in the late summer, a structural inspector named Wendell who worked for the city, and who had come to the house on Lamar to sign off on a permitted repair, and had stayed for 40 minutes because she had questions about load distribution in the original roof joists that turned out to be genuinely interesting. Questions, the kind that required pulling out a notebook. He had come back the following week with a reference book and no other stated reason for returning. She had made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table on the original hard pine floor without looking at it and talked about joists like a man who cared about what held things up. He did not perform ease. He did not require performance from her. He asked good questions and accepted her answers and left when the conversation was finished, rather than searching for reasons to extend it. That was sufficient for her to decide it was worth finding out what else he was. Brandon had pled no contest to the document fraud charges in August. His attorney had negotiated a sentence that included restitution, the full $63,000 returned, plus costs, supervised probation, and a permanent bar from serving in any fiduciary or financial advisory capacity in the state of Tennessee. The equity firm had parted ways with him in March, before the criminal charges were formalized, with the particular efficiency of organizations that know how to protect themselves from the people they have already decided to abandon. Lynette Carr had also parted ways with him, around the same time, with considerably less administrative precision. Simone heard all of this in pieces, through Vivienne, through public records she did not have to search for, because they found their way to her through the ordinary course of things. She received each piece of information the way she received all information. Noted, filed, moved past. Vincent was doing well. He had resumed his Thursday morning walks and his Tuesday card games, and the slow, purposeful life of a man who had nothing to prove to anyone and knew it. He did not talk often about the basement. When he did, he talked about it the way soldiers talked about difficult deployments, not with drama, but with the dry precision of someone describing conditions they had navigated and survived. He said once that the thing that had kept him steady down there was knowing his daughter was coming. She had known she was coming too. She was on the porch on a Tuesday morning in late October, coffee in hand, watching the oak tree in the front yard drop its leaves in the particular slow spiral of a windless fall day, when it occurred to her that the house on Lamar was the most complete it had ever been. Not finished, never finished, but complete in the way that a thing was complete when it contained exactly what it was supposed to contain and nothing it was not. She had built every part of it with her own hands, and it had held. That was the only record that mattered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.